County Zoning Board of Appeals to order. This is case number, or application number 2022-040. There are three pen numbers involved: 1311-400-012, 1311-400-007, and 1314-200-001. The address is Country Club Road, Woodstock, Illinois. The property consists of approximately 102.08 acres and is located on the west side of Country Club Road at the northwest intersection of Country Club Road and Mason Hill Road in Dorr Township. The applicant is called the Title Land Trust 11432-410. Who's the beneficiary of the land trust?
It's the trust.
Killarney LLC is the beneficiary, and then the members of that are Brian Kelly and your sister and your brother, whose names you can state.
16, did you say?
No, I said are his siblings, his brother and his sister and Brian are the members of Killarney LLC, and Killarney LLC is the beneficiary of the land trust.
Okay.
So there's two layers of...
Let's hope we don't have to figure that out for any reason. The request is a reclassification from A1 Agricultural District to E3 Estate District. This time I'd like to introduce the members of the board. And their townships. Vicki Gardner, Nunde Township. Robert Cosin, Algonquin Township. Kurt Schnabel, Riley Township. Donald Smolinski, Grafton Township. Thomas Chers, Coral Township. Jessica Beverly, Dorr Township. And David Stone, that's me, McHenry Township. We mentioned the townships because under state law, there can only be one board member per township. So we comply with that. Publisher's certificate of publication from the newspaper is dated October 15th, 2022, and thereby meets ordinance requirements. Affidavit posting was signed and date posted was October 25th, 2022, and thereby meets ordinance requirements. Affidavit mailing was signed and date mailed was October 13th, 2022, and thereby meets ordinance requirements. Survey has been checked against petition, legal notice, and publication in newspaper, and all three match. Filing fees have been paid. Endangered species consultation was not required for this petition application. We've been fighting about whether we're going to call this a petition or an application, so the paperwork still has differences. The endangered species consultation was not required. Well, I had read that already. The Swell Water Conservation District report has been received. At this time, there's one person in the audience. Are you an objector or an observer?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry?
My name is Janet Truffalet, and I live at 1615 South Fleming Road. So I'm adjacent to Kelly property.
Okay. Thank you. So you might want to say something in the hearing. Therefore, I'm going to swear you in with petitioner and petitioner's attorney.
I don't intend to testify.
Okay, if you don't want to be sworn in, I won't swear you in.
Because I'm just here to listen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then you two want to raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, answer, I do.
I do.
Thank you. You have a present? You're the attorney?
I'm the attorney,
Want to
yes.
state your parents?
Christina Green from Sweeten Mayor.
Okay. And sir?
Brian Kelly, the general property manager and general manager of the
Okay.
ownership.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure their microphone is on.
You have to turn it on.
Okay, should we restate that?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. I'm Christina Green from Sweeten Mayor. I'm the attorney for the applicant. With me is Brian Kelly.
So I represent the family trust, and I'm the general partner in the holding company, Killarney LLC.
So I assume you have a presentation.
Correct.
Proceed.
Okay, thank you. As you stated, the property is approximately 102.08 acres. It's 3 tax parcels. The applicant desires to rezone the subject property from A1 to E3 estate zoning, which is consistent with the McHenry County 2030 and beyond comprehensive plan and is consistent with the properties in the area. The subject property is contiguous to the village of Bull Valley, and it's 800 feet from the city of Woodstock. It is surrounded on the north, west, and east by E3 zone properties, and to the south by A1 zone properties. I'll go through your approval standards for map amendments, and then I will also address the soil and water conservation report, and then I can answer any questions. But for your approval standards for map amendments, the first one is compatibility of the proposed zoning with the existing use and zoning of nearby property. The reclassification from the A1 to the E3 is consistent with the existing use and the zoning of nearby properties. The agricultural use can remain in E3, or it can be switched to residential zoning in E3. And this is compatible with your comprehensive plan that shows it designated as a state. And as I stated, the surrounding properties to the northwest and east are also E3 zone parcels. So this is consistent with the nearby. There's also significant other E3 zone parcels in the area. The extent to which the property values of the subject property are diminished by the existing zoning. The property value of the subject property right now is just farm prices. And if the property is rezoned to E3 and can in the future be developed as a state, consistent with your comprehensive plan, that does increase the value of the property. So there is diminished value if you keep it in the A1 zoning district, as well as the fact that all surrounding properties are E3 except for the one to the south. The extent to which the public health, safety, and welfare are promoted by the existing zoning. The health, safety, and welfare are not promoted by the existing zoning, and there's really no gain to the public if the proposed zoning is denied. The current zoning is for agricultural use. With the new zoning, it could continue as agricultural use until such time as it is needed for development, as the area expands and development and housing is needed in the area, at which point in time it would be developed consistent with your comprehensive plan. There are some environmental features on the property, which we'll discuss later, and which Soil and Water pointed out, as well as the Boone Creek Watershed Alliance. And so we'll address those later, but one of the comments I had is that this would have to be designed under your Uniform Development Code at such time that it is developed. It would have to be a conservation development, and so that form of development may actually even be better to the public than to have it tilled and chemicals sprayed on it on a regular basis because of the watershed. So it may be even more beneficial to be residential than to be farmland. That's one thing that we may want to consider. Relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant. Again, as I said, there's no gain to the public to keep it zoned A1, and the hardship would be a negative economic impact to the applicant. The suitability of the property for the purposes for which it is presently zoned, it is being used as farmland, so it is suitable for agricultural zoning, but it is also suitable for estate zoning, and in estate zoning it can also be farmed or it can be estate residential. The length of time that the property has been vacant as zoned, it is currently being farmed, so I don't know that you'd really consider it vacant, it's being farmed. The community need for the proposed use, I don't know if right now there's a shortage for housing, but down the road there will be a shortage of housing in McHenry County, and your comprehensive plan does discuss this in detail. And I trust that McHenry County and staff put a lot of time into your comprehensive plan. Your comprehensive plan talks about compact development, how it would like to have future development in the rural areas be contiguous to the developed areas, and this property is perfect for that because it is contiguous to Bull Valley and about 800 feet from the city of Woodstock. So this property would be very good for future development in the area, and that is what was determined when your comprehensive plan was made, so this would be consistent with that. And then the final, is it consistent with the comprehensive plan, which I've stated that it is. As far as the environmental factors, both Soil and Water and today's letter from the Boone Dutch Creek Watershed Alliance, they acknowledge that there is a fen out there and a watershed area, and so that there has to be some considerations taken into account when the property is developed. The letter today even acknowledges that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the Boone Dutch Creek Watershed Alliance, they have a report that you can get online, and it does in that report also talk about how McHenry County's comprehensive plan considers all these features. And so in compliance with the comprehensive plan and considering these features, this property is, ideal for estate zoning. It would have to, under your code, if it has certain triggers, which this property does, then it has to be a conservation design when it is developed. And so that is also a protection that you have when it comes forward to be developed. Your code will require it to be a conservation design. At this time, there is no development plan for the property. There's just to rezone it to make it compatible and make it desirable for future development. So, and then I can answer questions, or Brian, if you want to add anything, you can.
Across from the board, starting with Mr. Cozen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you began with a reference to the application of the land trust beneficial interest, have you or would you be able to file a complete listing of all beneficial interests and the portion they have in this parcel or in this trust?
So we did provide staff with the name of all the members, but I can tell you that Killarney LLC is the 100% beneficial owner. And then you and your two siblings each own 1/3?
Well, it's an estate, so it was part of a GST estate that my parents set up 30-some years ago when they set these trusts up. So there are 23 grandchildren. I do the math on that, I guess. And I got the short straw to having to oversee the trust. But does that answer your question?
We could provide, do you want to? We could, if you would like us to. We could
Yeah, if you could just provide that to staff,
Summary.
since it already began that discussion along that line. And
Certainly.
congratulations on having a very robust family tree.
It's an Irish thing, I guess.
If we can look at the approval standards which you had filed, how long has, again, the trust owned this particular parcel?
A long time.
I would guess.
Yeah, I guess.
Various properties were purchased starting from 1965 over a 30-year period. I'm assuming this property was probably purchased in the early 1980s, but I'm not exactly sure. It's been owned. Well, actually, the date would be the date of the creation of the title trust, which we could provide you, but it's at least 40 years.
Under question 2, there is a reference to land value. Did at any time in the decision process and what brought you here today, did you consult with any appraisers or land planners to arrive at that statement of land value?
With the real estate broker, actually, who said that the values would be better if it was estate zoning.
In question 3, there's a statement that this is not highly productive agricultural land. Using the standards that are set out in the natural NWI report, page 45 of 69, it says that 44.5% of the property is prime agricultural land. Could you just reconcile that statement of high productivity not being, even though we're only a difference of about 6 acres?
6 acres.
Well, if you assume that the parcel's 102 and then we drop off 2 and we come around a block with 100, that means the difference between 50/50 is about 6 acres.
50 or so, I see what you're saying. So if you look at their map, and I don't have it in front of me, but the prime agricultural kind of is spotty. Oh, here's the,
Right.
it's not, so there, yes, there is some that's prime agricultural, but it's not one large section that you can say this is good farmland and this is not. The whole thing is tilled, but it's not all prime in one area. That would be like, if we took off the bottom 40 acres, we could say that's prime agricultural. So that was the kind of
The basis
the
for...
the argument there.
Then moving to question, or statement number 4 concerning hydric soils. The statement is that there is not highly, that there are wet areas of the property.
Yes.
Again, in that same report, 61 of 69, it says that the hydric soils is 3.15, again, using the 100 base mark, that's only 3 acres. Again, is that your representation that that's a sufficient coverage of area?
Well, yes, and that was, without having had this benefit of this report, we thought there was more wet areas than what they're showing. It appears that most of the wet areas are up in the north end of the property.
Say that again.
So we did not have this report when I was preparing this, and we thought there was more wet out there than they're showing on this report. This report is showing that most of the wetlands are up in the north end of the property.
In statement number 6 of your approval standards for map amendment, you lay out a statement that says there's a growing need for housing. In 2010, the population by the U.S. Census says that McKenna County was 308,000 people, and in 2020 it was 310,000 people. Do you still see that as a forecast of a growing need?
Well, this was based on speaking with the realtor, that there was a housing shortage in the last couple of years. And so, yes, I did, based on the fact that there's been housing shortages in the last couple of years, I do feel there's a growing need. Maybe it has slowed down because of the interest rates, but for a while there, it was hard to get housing.
If I can add,
Please.
so we hired, I'm going to guess maybe 6 years ago, a pretty reputable market research firm, Terry Cross and Associates. And so they did the analysis, this is pre-COVID, of the migration of this generation from 30 to 45 out to the suburbs. A restatement of that based on the post-COVID era has accelerated, where more and more people are looking for remote places because of working from home, and also the concerns about crime and things that are going on in Chicago. And as I drive through the county and see, the areas with the roads and the expansion, I thought that analysis seemed pretty consistent with a growing demand for, residential development in this area as opposed to other parts of the state.
Did anyone give you an estimate of how many home sites could be fashioned onto this 102 acres?
Based on the zoning, no. Based on just looking at the math, and based on E3 and partially off the development lands, if you had 3-acre lots, there's probably about 80% of the property on the max side that could be developed, given the restricted wetlands. So that would be 30, I guess, 25 almost.
Sounds like it'd be less than 30 because I see at least one pond on the property.
Yeah,
and
right.
there's some stuff.
Well, so if you took 100 acres and you took roughly 20 out to preserve the open space vision, and depending on the development of trying to get clustered type dwellings and open spaces, and if you had an average of 3 into 80, so 25 would be reasonable.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Cozen, go ahead.
No, Mr. Chairman, you anticipated my line of questioning, because the question was, how did the applicant settle on E3 as part of your, and not either E5 or even retaining it as an A2?
So the E3, I mean, partially for report, but partially because the comprehensive plan shows it as a state, and then the surrounding parcels are E3, so we went with what the surrounding parcels show.
There's a,
There's an A1 at the bottom.
Let me just add something to the last statement, if you don't mind. So we do not have any plans or intention of developing this property.
But doing what to the property?
Our family and the estate does not have any plans to develop this property. We're looking for an ability to market the property to an investor that would be a long-term investor, and given the market and the timing of the roads, would do the appropriate planning and development at some point in the future. But our family is not in this business, and given my role as the trustee, I have no desire or interest in either managing or overseeing a project like this.
just to...
Are you finished?
Almost, Mr. Chairman. There's an illustration called current zoning on page 13 of 69. I note that it seems somewhat telling that the petitions of the other properties of the E3, if I am correct in my interpretation, and I stand to be corrected, that the petitions occur sometime in the 1980s, that's 86, even as far back as 1979. So the most recent one is not even contiguous, and that's in 2019. So it seems that, would you concur that there's a long-term trend in that particular area?
Yes.
I'm finished, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your patience.
Mr. Smolinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kelly has answered the first of my questions about any development plans that he may have. The question is your trust domiciled in McHenry County?
It's an Illinois corporation.
An Illinois corporation.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said that you've owned this property for many years. Was there an impetus at this time to apply for the E3 zoning?
So there was an estate, my mom died in 1990, and then my father died in 2013. And given their overall state assets, they also owned a number of manufacturing and business ventures that other family members were active in. So it took some time to have conversation with the family about who wanted to be active in those assets and who did not. And myself and two of my siblings were not active in my dad's business. And so it just the nature of how long it could take to settle estate plans, that happened a few years back. And so as 23, the grandchildren, 18, are actually under the three families. Most everyone lives outside of the state of Illinois, if you live here, but are not have any interest personally, emotionally, in either living on the property or developing the property. So those conversations took some time to have, as I wanted each family member to weigh in. I was born and raised on this property. I've lived in Woodstock 50 out of 56 years that I've been alive. And if there was anyone that had any real emotional tie to continue to live and operate, it most likely would be me. And I'm busy with other things that aren't aligned necessarily with holding this asset. So a long-winded answer to your question, but in hindsight, if at least in my case, if I was more aware of the complexity of the estate and all these various assets, there'd be no reason why I would not have pursued requesting the zoning change 3-4 years ago. long-winded answer, but that's why we're here today.
Thank you. Next question I have, is there any consideration to annexing to an adjacent municipality? According to the map, it looks like the only one that's contiguous with your property is Bull Valley. Has there been any consideration to that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't know.
So, part of the legal research to understanding the various properties owned and where they exist, there's a boundary agreement between Woodstock and Bull Valley that commenced in the late 90s, I believe. And whatever, if I understand it correctly, the way it was explained to me, that because of where this property is, and I would suspect that the people that worked on that were very interested in looking at this area and making sure that as Woodstock was growing, that Bull Valley would retain its culture and its uniqueness in terms of the nature of the properties in a smaller community, which I think is the objective of this agreement, that this particular property could annex into Woodstock, given its boundaries, but whatever development that the future investor would have, they would have to work with the Village of Bull Valley and gain consent with the density, the traffic. So in essence, whether it's under Bull Valley or Woodstock, I believe the process would require consent from both jurisdictions.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Mr. Jers?
I don't need this.
It's on.
I get it.
Did you say no questions?
No questions.
No. Ms. Gardner?
Sorry.
It's okay. I have just a couple of questions. Some of them have already been answered. Does your family farm this land themselves, or do you rent it out to a farmer?
It's leased
It's
to
leased
a
out.
farming operation,
Okay.
and has been for probably 30 plus years.
So even with the, if there's a change in zoning, that would continue as long as it would?
Yes,
Okay.
under our ownership it would be.
Right,
This-
yeah.
We have no source of income on this property to
Yeah.
pay the taxes, so the farming is very helpful for that.
Yeah. Do you have a buyer lined up for this property yet, or no?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's not even listed.
So you're not even looking yet?
Not yet.
Okay,
But at some point we will.
okay. So, as A1, I'm assuming that the property taxes would be cheaper than E3, is that correct?
So what I was advised
Uh-huh.
is that as long as the property maintains its use, that the taxes on the property would not change.
Oh, okay, all right, so that makes more sense to me.
That was probably
Because
my first question myself.
I was wondering what the advantage for you would be to change the zoning and pay more property taxes. So that answers that, thank you.
I only have one thing, and I'd like to follow up on what Ms. Gardner said. As someone that's familiar with some of these trust-type matters and estate matters, I'm not asking for exact numbers, but whatever income that the estate is getting from the leasing on the farmland, if you were to hazard a guess, would you say that that covers the amount of annual property taxes or a certain portion, just out of my own curiosity, because I realize taxes are a cost to the trust, trustees, etc. over the course of time. This is getting a bit intermittent, so I'll just shut up and Look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
As a standalone property, the revenue on the leasing exceeds the tax expense. But there are 18 other people that if I were to divide the net income out, they might be able to go out and get a nice dinner. That's under $100. Does that answer your question?
It does. I have nothing further. Thank you.
Ms. Beverly?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering, I have a question about the other E3 parcels that are noted here. Are those farmed or developed at this time?
I think the majority of those are farmed, but yeah, do you have the area?
They are,
They're all farmed,
as far as I know.
as far as he knows.
The
Yeah.
ones, I can probably answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, can you put the previous slide? Okay, so, so Jay Kraepelin, I believe is the owner, but he manages a farm to, I guess it would be west, and those two pieces there from Fleming Road as you head towards the sanctuary, those have primarily always been farmed. He also, in addition to the other farmer, he also cuts the hay in the front end of our property. That's got the wetlands. It's really not tillable because of the topography. So he uses that for his horses and things. And then the property, I guess, straight down, that's A1, there's a horse farm. No, okay, so where it says A1 to Cold Springs Road, there's a horse farm there. And then behind that horse farm, when I've driven back, there's corn and hay. So I don't know how much of that, but I know the horse farm does seem to occupy a fairly large portion of that property.
My next question is that if you zone this E3, are you going to work in concert with the other neighbors to recruit a long-term investor in the area? I mean, is there like a game plan for that, or are you just going to get the zoning change and list it and see what happens?
I've had no conversations with them. I would be opposed if, once listed, that they came to us and said, hey, we'd like to pool this property. For me, I want the process to be very simple and straightforward. And that's why I think the ideal buyer is a long-term investor that would look at something, probably not as long as we've owned it, but certainly longer than a year. I have no idea what the neighbors plan to do or not do, but I've had no conversation with them about that.
That was my question. Thank you so much.
Let me follow up on that. So when you're talking the neighbors, you're talking the ones to the west and the south, is that correct? Because across the road, isn't that also part of the estate?
Yeah, we're talking about the adjacent, well, can you say adjacent properties? We're talking about on the south side, or on the south side of the property,
Okay.
right? Yeah.
So the north side of once you cross Country Club Road, that is also owned by the estate, or the majority of that up there is owned by the estate.
That's correct.
Okay, just so you know.
And that property is listed.
Beverly?
That's all I had. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm a little bit confused by this, because essentially what you're saying is we'd like to get E3 just so we can boost our ultimate purchase price up.
That is one of the reasons, is so that, but also because it expands the pool of potential buyers to have somebody who wants to hold it as an investment to buy the land and then eventually develop it as E3, as in a consistent plan with the other lands that are surrounding it and as set forth in your comprehensive plan. So it expands the pool of potential buyers, and it does increase the value of the land, yes.
Does anyone else have any questions that were raised by someone that talked after you talked? If not, then we'll, do you have anything further that you want to offer?
Not at this time.
Then we'll move on to comments by the public, starting with the staff. Christine? Questions?
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Anna Kurtzman, Senior Planner.
Anna, you can ask any questions you have too.
Thank you. Okay, I had no questions at this time for the applicant. Okay. About 11:30 this morning, we did receive a letter from the Boone Dutch Creeks Watershed Alliance, which they asked to have included into the record, so I'm going to read that into the record. Okay. It says November 10th, 2022, Zoning Board of Appeals or Hearing Office, care of McHenry County Department of Planning and Development, Suite 208, with their address. Reason, zoning application 2022-040, with all the information identifying this property. Dear Chair Stone, members of the ZBA and Zoning Enforcement Officer Renee Hanlon. The Boone Dutch Creek.
You're not going to read the whole thing, are you?
I was going to read it into the record.
Well, I'll just admit it as Exhibit 1. It's admitted into evidence.
Thank you. Okay.
You can make comments about it if you'd like.
Okay.
Have
So,
you seen this, by the way?
Yes, we have.
Yes, we have, just recently.
yeah, like I said, it came in at 11:30 today. So the way to put onto that particular piece of evidence, most of their comments have to deal with the conservation design criteria, which would apply if and when a subdivision plat is submitted for consideration. The way that you need to put on it is simply that there are environmental factors to be considered as part of your zoning consideration, but not for the design of this property. In terms of my report, as noted, it is adjacent. This property is adjacent to the community of Bull Valley, and within 800 feet of the city of Woodstock. There are a significant amount of area in the immediate vicinity that is currently zoned E3, with the continuing existing trend of A1, mainly to the south. Our comprehensive plan does note that this entire area was envisioned to develop eventually as a state. The requested rezoning is an estate classification, so it would be consistent with the comprehensive plan. As I said, there are environmental factors with this property, none of which would be impacted by the act of rezoning. Those would be impacted by use. The uses under an A1 are the exact same uses under the E3. The only difference would be the density that could potentially be there under the E3 classification. Staff is noting that this is consistent with our plans, therefore we are recommending approval of this particular request.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else to be brought before the board, we'll...
Can we do staff
I'm
questions?
sorry, go ahead.
Can we ask staff questions?
Sure.
Okay. Do you want to start since we started that way?
Mr. Chairman, may I go first?
Any objection to Mr. Posen going first?
No.
Go ahead, Mr. Posen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has any comment been received from either Woodstock or Bull Valley?
No.
Who maintains Country Club Road, if you are aware of that? Or
This particular stretch, I believe it is the township.
that concludes my questions to staff.
Ms. Beverly? Mrs. Beverly?
Thank you. Can you just walk us through the UDO triggers? I know that in the 2030 plan, this is zoned estate, but then there are UDO triggers that say that it has to be a conservation development. So if the 2030 plan is revised and the 2050 plan is adopted prior to the subdivision plat, our UDO governance would still apply in this case?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further from the board or from the, it's time for you to make a closing statement.
Thank you. So basically, for all the reasons we stated, the property is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It is surrounded by E3 zoning. It has a better value with E3 zoning than an A1 zoning. There is no harm to the public. For all of those reasons, we respectfully request that you rezone from A1 to E3 for the subject property.
Thank you. Anything further from the staff?
No.
Okay, then at this point, I'm going to close the meeting and go to open a voting meeting. Any objection to that? Hearing none, we'll proceed. The testimony portion of the hearing is concluded. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the change in zoning from A1 to E3.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Jers, seconded by Gardner, that we approve the request of E3 zoning. Discussion starting with Mr. Jers.
Having been one of the co-authors of the 2020 plan, which we all know where that went, but this property is asking to be E3. If the petitioner wanted to annex to Bull Valley, they'd probably be welcomed with open arms. The 800 feet away from the city of Woodstock is just a matter of time before you'd be part of the city of Woodstock. On the calendar, it's a blink in the whole big picture. You got a beautiful road frontage. It looks like over 1,000 feet. I don't see anything that prohibits you from developing this. I understand you got over 20 grandchildren to get a piece of the pie. A few years ago, I inherited 1/17 of 1/2 of a 100-acre farm in Peatone, Illinois that my uncle Charlie bought. Left it, didn't have kids. Left it to all of his nieces and nephews. And I bought a used trailer with the money. It didn't amount to a hill of beans. So I understand about cutting it up with all the heirs, and every few years you're going to get a few more heirs, and those slices of the pie are going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. It makes perfect sense to put this to E3, even though you're not going to develop it in the future. It gives you, this is your way out, this is your escape hatch. I'm in favor of it.
Ms. Gardner.
I agree with Mr. Jers. I believe that you've met standards as required. The presentation was very clear. Your reasons for wanting to do this are very clear, very understandable, and it certainly is in keeping with our long-range plans for this area, so I'm in favor.
I don't see anything at all about your request that should be questionable at all in light of current conditions at the site, and I believe E3 would definitely be a higher, better use of that type of property, and that's something that we're always trying to seek out, so I'm in favor of it on that basis alone. Thanks.
Ms. Beverly. It's Mrs. Beverly.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I am concerned about the sensitive aquifer refractory areas, but we have a lot of those throughout the county, and it does seem like the Boone Dutch Creek watershed and the Soil Water Conservation District and the Conservation Plan will take care of any of those concerns moving forward as it's developed. Thank you.
Mr. Smolinski.
I think the petitioner has, or excuse me, the applicant has met the approval standards for a amendment. This makes all the sense in the world to me, that you be prepared to sell it to an investor who will ultimately develop it in an estate manner. So I will support the petition.
Mr. Cozen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to extend my appreciation to the applicant. It is never comfortable to expose to a room full of strangers plans and futures and expectations of a family. I totally recognize the difficulties of trying to explain the intricacies that occur in the privacy of one's home. At the same time, I want to also commend the applicant for the detail by which they made the presentation, explained the area, but note that with one codicil that a reclassification in of itself is not development, but then somebody who has such a long cultivated family tree knows that there's many years ahead of you. And for that, I support the petition as submitted. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said up to this point. I'm especially happy that this particular set of facts drew our alternate, Mr. Jers, into discussing a little bit. He's a very quiet member, so thank you for that. And I'm going to vote in favor of it. Okay, starting, I as a vote in favor of the application. Becky Gardner,
Aye.
Robert Kusin,
Aye.
Kurt Schnabel,
Aye.
Mr. Smolinski,
Aye.
Tom, Jessica Beverly,
Yes.
Thomas Shears,
Yes.
and David Stone. I'll vote yes. This will go to the county board with a recommendation approval 7-0. That concludes the hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.